Well, here we go, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron and Growth Podcast. I am your co-host, Benny Fowler, with my other co-host, Ryan Harris, Super Bowl champion. And today we have a special guest, Zaw Thet. Zaw is a new friend of mine and now a new friend of Ryan. Zaw is an incredible entrepreneur. He is the youngest person to graduate from Stanford Business School, serial entrepreneur, investor, all around great guy. Where do you want to start in terms of sharing a little bit about your story and your journey?
Let's start with the failures more than the successes,
Yeah,
Okay.
there we go.
I think everyone paints a rosy picture. And there's obviously, I've been very blessed in life and, obviously I've worked hard for all that. But, to me, I think it's Winston Churchill said it best. He's, and actually, I don't know if this is a real quote attributed to him, but I've said it this way for a couple of years. So I'll just say it, that, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And
Yeah.
I mean, that applies to everything, right? Not just business, but sports and business, everything in life, really, in general, kind of tied together. And so when I look back on my career so far, hopefully I'm still in the prime of what I do, that it's a lot of learning lessons along the way. So as I was saying, I grew up in Wisconsin. I came out to Stanford as an undergrad in 1998 during the first dot-com boom. And man, things were crazy back then. I mean, it was to the point where I think at one point, 20% of the dorm and then the house that I lived in had dropped out of Stanford to go start a company. This was 1999. So that's when I got my start, was building search engines in 1999. Google had just come out. That's how old I am. So we'll fast forward it all. So I did a bunch of startups.
I don't want you to fast forward. I want you to talk about, because I know, when we first met, you dropped out of Stanford too.
I did.
Yeah. And would you tell your parents?
That was one of the rougher conversations, I've had in my life. In the end, it was great, but it was Thanksgiving of my sophomore year of Stanford. And so my parents are immigrants. So they came from Burma in the early 70s, got out of all the craziness when the military took over, the junta and all this stuff. And so I remember sitting around their little, dining room, kitchen table, and I was sweating. I was like, this is going to be really bad. But I'd already made up my mind. And they were actually very supportive, though. Back then, at least, you could go back. So you could take a leave of absence. So that's the way I pitched it, was that I'm going to take a leave of absence. I got to go do this startup. This is a great opportunity. And who knows if it'll happen again. Didn't know I was going to be doing it for the next 25 years.
Let's talk about the startup journey, your first startup journey and the companies that you were a part of. And then when you got your first big break in terms of a company that scaled. Let's dive into that.
Yeah. So I was 19 years old when I started my first company. I had no idea what I was doing. Like literally I was reading, this is like back to Encyclopedia Britannica. There was no like websites for this. There was no newsletters. And so it was just learn on the fly. That's what it was. And meeting a lot of people, some people, when they start companies, they're super secretive and they don't like to talk about them. And to me, I've always found it better to just be open with everyone, describe both what's going right and what's going wrong. And it's really about execution. Yes, you might have a piece of technology or a piece of IP that makes it so no one else can copy it. But really in the end, right?
What's the execution piece you think people miss the most when building a company?
I think it's team. I really do. If you don't have the right people around you, and look, I've been through every journey as a founder, obviously a CEO, then also as an investor into other companies. And I call it like an investor is really like, to me, I felt like I was doing CEO therapy all the time. So it's just talking about their problems, like someone that could relate to them, that had been through the same things that they'd been through. And so I think if I had to break it down as a founder and as a CEO, that you really have only a couple of really key responsibilities. If you do these, everything else kind of falls into line. So first one is you always got to make sure there's cash in the bank. You don't want you going out of business. So that's number one priority, right? The second one is set the vision and the objectives for the company. Don't try and get too much into the minutia, but set a clear vision, set a clear set of objectives and goals so that people understand the direction that they're going. And so if you get hit by a bus or you're out for travel for a week, there's not people asking you every minute, what should I be doing? That's bad. The third is always be selling. And so, I'm a big believer in a founder-led sales model where you start out and like you're getting market feedback. And the only way you're going to get feedback is by talking to your customers, whether those be consumers, whether those be businesses, whether in our case now, whether it's like doctors, nurses, physicians, assistants. I want to be on the front lines understanding their problems. But then you're also selling to investors, you're also selling to press. And then the last one is you're always selling to potential team members. And so those are the big ones. And then the last one is set the culture, right? And understand from very early on, like what are your principles going to be? Setting that culture of accountability is I think really important. If you do those things and you fail, you at least try.
Well, I'm glad for many reasons that we got you on today, because I don't know if you know this, but 78% of former NFL players end up broke and or divorced or chemically dependent. And Benny and I have seen it, which is guys get advice from people or ideas from people, everything from, I was offered a company that would sell the milk drained from Fruit Loops and Cocoa Puffs for people to drink, right? And all these things. Like you name it, Benny and I, every NFL player has had the business pitch. What are the keys to looking at a good business plan to determine whether or not it's a sustainable investment for an individual?
One is have a thesis, right? Like I'm investing in this kind of thing. And so at least for Signia, the thesis was I'm investing in disruptive technologies that are going to go after really big incumbent markets and try and disrupt them. So have a thesis, right, to set out, because then it's much easier to say no. And then usually a lot of it is signals, right? So are there other great co-investors, right? So that's obviously when you're super early on, there may not be any other investors. So you might be the first. And at my shop, we were trying to be the first investor. But the other signals are pedigree, right? So have they done this before? Has the team worked in here before? Have they done customer interviews? I created templates because the one thing I hated as an entrepreneur was talking to investors and then just, I guess now we call it ghosting, right? But like just them never getting back to me. So I just try and have like a template, which is basically like, hey, this is not the right investment for me. And I always try and give some sort of feedback around why it wasn't. And so at least they can come back. And last thing I'll say on this was one of the biggest metrics for me as an investor when I was on that side of the house for success was how many deals were being sent to me by entrepreneurs that I had actually said no to because I treated them fairly, honestly, thoughtfully throughout the process. They knew it wasn't the right fit for me, but they knew what I was looking for. And so when they had a friend that came and said, hey, I'm working on this thing, they're like, you know what? You should go talk to Zaw. He didn't invest in us because of XYZ, but he was forthright and gave us great feedback and, helped us through the process. But he is looking for stuff like you. And so that was always my big barometer for success on that end. Question for you guys though. I'm curious from your perspectives, as you get all these different things thrown at you, do you typically, for the 78% of people that come out of the leagues, there's typically a business advisor or someone, right? That's like works with your agent or someone before, or is it just a free for all? No? Okay.
Yeah, it's a free for all because your agent doesn't really know. Agents aren't involved in venture. Their job is to get you and land you the contract. The way I look at things now is I have like an investment committee if I am going to write a check for anything, and I will run it by the industry experts because that I know that are in my network that I can call friends in terms of, hey, I'm looking at this. What do you think? And if they think it's interesting, number one, to where they would write a check or the family office that they work for or are a part of would write a check, then that gives me, to your point, Zaw, that's a signal.
Here's some of the components people miss, right? I mean, I got drafted, and before I got home from the press conference, my uncle had sent me a deck for a real estate development, which, to your point, he had never done it before. And it was the entire amount of my first contract. And I'm like, what, and I love my uncle, right? But like you're dealing with people who are not logical. And then lastly, there is zero collective knowledge and education about financial literacy. I am one of the many players who lost their first $1 million. And it was because I didn't say no. It's because I didn't have a theory. Like I love that you said theory, have a thesis, because that's what helped me recently. and towards the end of my career is I'm an income investor, right? I've had my event. I'm not investing unless I'm making money Q1 or month one. That's just not what I'm going to do, right? And so that thesis has helped me, to your point, say, look, I love this idea, but I only invest in things that produce income because I'm a retiree. I need income. I don't need growth. And then lastly, being able to just say no.
The thesis is super important. Peyton was speaking at a YPO event, and he gets pitched a lot of different investments, and then he also gets pitched a lot of different things in terms of philanthropy. And the way he has it in the way he does it with philanthropy is, hey, my family and I are committed to this. This is what we are committed to for this year. And he was just talking about his schedule and what he says yes to. And he's like, everybody thinks that I'm super busy, but no, it's actually just fit around my family thesis and my mission statement to what I will say yes to. So it's easy for him to say yes to things, and then he politely declines other things. But I would like to go back and dive into going back to Stanford Business School and then talk about your next company after that.
I went and did startups most of the time. I was working probably 40, 50 hours a week. It was actually, there were two of us that were the idiots that were working during business school. It was myself, and then it was Prague, who was working for the 49ers. And as Benny alluded to, back, again, this is going to date me, but like back in those days, early on, 2002, 2003, going into 04, if we were on different carriers, we couldn't send text messages to each other, right? It was very, very difficult. Or it was that really horrible, sometimes they went through from Verizon to AT&T, sometimes they didn't. You had no idea. And it's why I think so many of us had, back then, had BlackBerrys, because BlackBerry Messenger worked across every carrier. So, they
miss BBM.
I miss BBM, man. They had me for a while. We basically went to all the carriers and said, hey, we're going to help create this new set of things called short codes. We're going to build these pipes that allow people to send text messages back and forth. We're going to then, on top of those pipes, open it up to allow other companies to send messages through. So it's not just consumers, but it could be, this is at the time when they were really big. So Yahoo, AOL, Zynga, the NBA, the NFL, we opened up all these pipes for all the different enterprise messaging as well as the consumer messaging.
Well, hey, man, you've been creating all kinds of solutions, and your most recent one is Exer AI. You've been called a mobile baron by publications. What went into the decision to create the AI company? What problem does Exer solve?
So our mission as a company, going back to this idea of having mission-driven companies, is help the world move, train, and play better. And I think we're really we have lots of opportunities in train and play, but right now, at least, we're really focused on the move part, which is really around health. Mm-hmm. And so how do we help people that are going through big musculoskeletal problems, whether that be surgery, whether that be a movement disorder like Parkinson's or cerebral palsy or stenosis, or how do we help people with chronic low back problems? How do we help elderly prevent them from falling? Give them programs that increase their likelihood that they won't fall, so fall prevention. It's a different industry, right? It's taking this full circle disruptive technology, which is AI and these computer vision models, these neural nets that we run on phones or tablets, and applying them to a very, very, what's the polite way to say this, a very broken industry in healthcare where there's a lot of waste and there's a lot of problems. That's what we kept doing. And so we're doing that in healthcare, trying to make, a real change in the world. And we're just starting to get there. So, we've been in stealth mode for a couple of years, and then in the last basically 18 months, 24 months, it really started to actually grow the company. So you won't see it as a consumer necessarily because we're prescribed by doctors, but as we continue to grow, hopefully more and more people become exposed to it.
Zaw Thet, everybody. Zaw, man, really appreciate you coming on the Gridiron and Growth podcast with Ryan and myself. Man, this is an incredible conversation. We've learned a tremendous amount. We would love to invite you back as you continue to grow and scale Exer. If there's any ways that we can help, please let us know. But just want to say thank you, man, for taking the time.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, gentlemen, and look forward to seeing you soon.